That was me. Yeah.
So one thing that we wanted to make sure that we mentioned too about the program, just to help give context about it, is sort of how this fits into the budget, how it fits into the state revenues annually. And as of right now, there isn't, so the money is paid out by the tax department, but it's not appropriated anywhere specifically as a line item in the budget. It's just, this is the, calculate the benefit, they go to the tax department, they demonstrate that they've, what they've earned against their award, and they're issued a check by the tax department as sort of a credit against their state income taxes that are withheld. And then what the state economists do in the revenue forecast is reduce the personal income tax that we will receive by the amount that we sort of assume will get paid out in veggie awards in any given year. So that's sort of how it fits into the bigger picture of making sure that our revenues and expenses balance from a budgetary perspective.
And that derives from the fact that when it started, the idea was this is money you wouldn't otherwise have. So why would we count that as an expenditure, that it's all extra, if in fact you, with some perfection, can discern the but for, that it wouldn't have happened otherwise. And when it first started, there was no cap on the program either. So again, for the same rationale, so why would you want to cap something that was only upside? And very quickly it became clear that at least you have a cap. That way then there'd be some discretion about what the best applicants were, not just anybody who came in. So the cost benefit model, the fiscal calculations are kind of what gives that cover, but it's only as good as that assumption.
Yeah. And we just recently started including it in our tax expenditure report.
That's correct. Yeah, we included it in the tax expenditure report in 2023, right? No, 2022. That's what year we're in.
We're in 2023.
2023. No, yeah, we are in 2023. So it was in our most recent tax expenditure report for 2023. And it usually hasn't been, or historically hasn't been.
And so when you all book it in as the
revenue
economists, as the revenue reduction, are you booking the revenue reduction from the actual payouts, or are you booking the revenue reduction from the promised awards?
Oh, it's only what's paid out.
Okay.
But it's not, it is such a tiny part of total personal income. It's not like, it's some giant movement and then year to year, it's not fluctuating wildly. So it just sort of gets baked in as a constant. And some of it is truly net new. It's just, you can't say for sure how much.
Any questions from anyone? Okay. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about, so we were having trouble getting just sort of the problems that the bill is trying to solve and how many of them are being solved by the amendments that came to us. We talked a little bit about the economic development aspects of it. But.
Yeah, so I think the bill is pretty much punting this to a task force, and then task force is going to dig into a lot of the issues and try and, deal with them. I think it arose, and Emily, I'm sure you can speak to this regarding the original H10 that you and Michael had sponsored. But the last two times that we were asked on behalf of the legislature to go in and look under the covers and examine an issue, we found real problems. We just, they weren't running the model right. It was costing a lot more than it needed to. They were doing this job retention screen. So a company that could say, or somebody could make a case for the company saying, I'm going to leave the state, they would treat that as a startup. So they run the model as if it was a startup. Now, the there were legislators who were attorneys. I don't know if anybody here is an attorney, but they told us that it wasn't statutorily allowed to do, make decisions like that. But certainly the model wasn't set up to accommodate that, because it's a very different model if you have a shutdown versus a startup. And so that was done, on a large scale with division of Global Foundries that was spun off. And then so why couldn't Global Foundries have just said the same thing about their whole operation? All right, let's do that as a startup and push the button. You get huge numbers. And, there may be a case where it's truly, that's truly the case. But when you look at the exchanges, you look at the financial companies, it was like, not like, but it exceeded the statutory authority. And this happened though right before the pandemic. And so once the pandemic came, nobody was paying any attention to anything else. So that just sort of floated, but that registered, I think, with people at Joint Fiscal that were looking at it. And then they wanted to increase the cap. Just to backtrack a little bit, after 2006, it ran pretty well for a few years. And then each legislative session, ACCD would come in and try to make a little carve outs to pay more for, if you're in a region that needs more, if you're doing green development, you get more, if you're doing this and this and this. And so they were expanding it. There's sort of a mission creep, and little by little, it was getting more and more expensive. The enhanced labor market areas are now like 85% of the state, and you can define it so it's almost everybody. And I think that's why there was concern. When we went in to look at, they wanted to raise the cap for the labor market enhancement part of these awards.
Does everyone know what a labor market enhancement is? Okay.
Yeah, so it's just an area with
Talked about that too. Okay.
supposedly economically distressed, but the way it's defined, it's pretty expansive. And, I think as an idea, that's not bad if you're really helping the areas that are truly disadvantaged, but it was much broader than that. Anyway, we went back in to look at it, and there's some documents that Sorcia has if anybody wants to look more thoroughly, but the Joint Fiscal Committee had Emily and Graham and Catherine drop a memo. They tasked me with, pursuing it. And the first thing we saw was just egregious mistakes in how awards had been calculated. And so they quickly retracted their request for an expansion, for a cap expansion, and said, we don't want to talk about this anymore. So the request was not just to look at the cap extension, but also look at the enhanced labor market areas in general. And so I had requested both. They were very slow in getting back. And once they realized that they had a real problem with a couple of awards, they retracted the request and then didn't follow through providing more information, and wrote an email to Joint Fiscal saying, there's a new bill coming out and it eliminates the enhanced labor market areas, and we support that. So it would be moot to pursue it. Then when it got to Commerce and there was going to be, enhanced labor market areas were going to be continued, they were all for it. So it was disingenuous. But anyway, I think that's what gave rise to some of the thinking about, we need to take another look at this. We need to, focus it in a different way and look at the bigger picture, try to see if there aren't more efficacious ways to use the money.
Remind me what we did with the carve outs for unemployment rate higher in regional areas and that sort of stuff. I remember having a discussion downstairs and I don't remember where we ended up.
You mean where there was there was an unemployment rate trigger for the whole program? Right. That was just cost. Yeah. There's some charts that I added different rates so people could see who qualified.
I think you're having two different conversations.
Oh, okay.
So I think you're talking about the original bill as introduced that had the cap around unemployment. And I think you're asking about how the program was subject to different rules if unemployment rates were different.
So the enhanced labor market areas have both an income and an unemployment rate trigger.
Right, I was backing up to.
And if you qualify, if you're below the state average for either, you're in. And
so some of the ski areas wind up being economically distressed.
so you get all kinds of
Because
promotions.
they have a lot of seasonal
Temporary help.
employment, yes. So they wind up looking like they're super, like, Stowe might look like it was super struggling, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, it's.
Just for instance.
Yeah, I think, Chittenden always gets moved out of that, but most of the awards do go there, dollar value basis. And that's because that's where there's the most existing activity and the highest growth, and has been for many, many years. That's sort of what the economy does. I mean, I think it's important to remember, just in context, for 200 years, the Vermont economy has been growing because entrepreneurs and capitalists do what entrepreneurs and capitalists do well. They recognize opportunities, they attract money to respond to those opportunities, and they make money doing so, and that's terrific. And they do it without public handouts for the most part. So, I hear more like, get government out of the way so we can do what we want to do than we need more handouts, in order to make things work. And so this is just, this is something on the edges. And if you have a particular strategic perspective or vision, you're wanting to make a particular cluster, you would develop something around that idea, that works, and, you could measure and use like that. But this has become something quite different, I think.
It's meaning veggie.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that's why there was a sense that it needed another look. At sunset, I think.
So yes, this bill extends the sunset.
Right.
So if this bill doesn't pass, it will sunset next year? Is that right?
January 1,
January 1 of this year, yeah.
24, yeah.
So there's a piece in here about sort of ways to get JFO access to look under the hood. And I'm trying to get my head around how that is useful or not useful. So let's say sort of the times when you, Tom, were asked to look under the hood because you already had permission, or
I had to get permission
Okay, the
from
times
JFC or another legislative committee.
the times how did we know to ask you to get permission? How did you know to ask for permission? How would joint fiscal, if joint fiscal has access to everything all the time, how expensive and time consuming would that be if you're just constantly if joint fiscal or you as a legislative economist wind up being the accountability mechanism for this program? That seems.
Well, the auditor is the primary accountability mechanism.
And the auditor's office has said over and over again that this program is not accountable.
Right. So he has the same problems that we do when we are granted access to the information, because there is still a lot that happens in executive session and there are no notes taken or recorded. So a lot of times there are a bunch of questions. I'll look at the financials and I'll say, all right, here's some obvious questions I'd be asking. And I said, did anybody ask this? And I can't tell. So, even that's limited. But usually it's something that happens that shows up in the press that looks really bad. And then somebody in the legislature says, we better find out more about that and see what's happening. Or they want to cap extension, which almost always gets approved. But sometimes joint fiscal will say, let's just make sure, it's justified, and there's language in statute for that. So it's not very often that happens. Early on, the auditor wasn't involved at all. So in the first, 5 or 6 years, I was, pulled in to look at it because I understood the model and was involved in its creation. But even then it wasn't terribly time consuming. I would hope that it's written in a way that it doesn't require a lot of intervention.
But I think historically, it's really been that request from the administration to increase either the LMA cap or the program cap that has triggered JFO and JFO's agent kind of involved in looking at what the requests, what's going on, are there big awards that are causing this, to sort of look under the hood. I think David spoke to today, right, that in current law, it appears that JFC could authorize JFO to have kind of blanket authorization to the information, but we've never interpreted it that way, that it could be that we could have this sort of this process change whereby JFC sort of says, if JFO wants to know, you give them the information when they request it. So I think from a process change, I think sort of that being flagged by Ledge Council, there'll be, that can be a conversation that happens this summer with the Joint Fiscal Committee to decide whether or not that authorization sort of happens. But then I think, it would be up to Joint Fiscal and, the members of the legislature that are on the committee to kind of say, hey, can you look at this one a little closer? Doesn't smell right or something. Or, we spend time looking at what, VEPSI's meeting minutes and what they're looking at, both from because VEPSI also authorizes any TIF and reviews all the TIF information. And we have, because TIF is, in the public space, it's towns, we have access to a whole bunch of information on TIFs and what they've submitted for information. So we, watch Joint Fiscal just to, see what's going on. So I think it would sort of flip more to that, paying attention to minutes, seeing what's going on, and then, looking for places where it might be. I don't think we're going to investigate. We're not going to request every single application and have Tom look at everything. I think it would be sort of the office would spend a little bit more time, looking in depth at things and maybe
One of the
using our
things.
judgment to trigger.
Okay.
I just, I'm trying to separate whether the mechanisms in place to access are insufficient or it's, I don't know when to ask. The trigger is not explicit as to when in the intuitive sense something doesn't smell right. Is there a way to formalize what the trigger should be instead of fussing about the process? The process is there for access. The question is, when do you want to look?
Right.
And it's not obvious to me.
Yeah.
I think part
What
of
would be the
it,
tells?
I think you brought the question up this morning when David was in, was the change where the legislative economist is engaged for any award over $1 million.
Well, two things with that's important. First of all,
I think that's the administration's economist.
no,
Okay.
there are two things. So one of it's the administration economist is that the model's run not by an ACCD employee. That was a problem with fingers on the scale because they wanted a result. They would even, you look at the emails, they even say, can't that be more? Can't, kind of thing. And then it would have, the arguments would always be in that direction though. Jeff Carr will run it with his own reputation at stake apart from, whoever's paying him on the thing. And if he reports to the council and not to ACCD, and I'm not sure the last iteration had that, but anyway, they have him running the model. That's good. And then any award that's over $1 million, he's supposed to touch base with me on. It's not a consensus run, but this is how it worked in the early days, and it worked okay. If you got something unusual, he'd usually pick up the phone and just call and say, I'm thinking of doing it this way. Does that make sense to you? And I said, fine, yeah. Or if I had a different idea, I'd tell him. And then it wasn't a problem down the road. So that's in the current thing. So if there's an award that's more than $1 million, we get at least eyes on it. And that'll make some of the worst ones probably screen for those in some way.
I really appreciate that idea in terms of the accountability that will add to the program. I think it's a great idea. And I don't want to ask you how much money you make, but I am curious how much adding the two of you to this process.
Well, Jeff's already doing it.
Okay. And he's already.
They retained him.
Okay, great.
And that's the bulk of the work.
Okay.
So I'm just doing it at the same
Okay,
AFO.
at the same level you were before.
Now it's down to about a quarter of our commercial rate, but
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. And I was wondering, like, is this about to make the cost of the program even more sort of out of scale with what it might need?
No, and if anything, when you look at how much is being spent, the money that is spent analyzing this stuff so that it goes out appropriately. I mean, this one project that we're 2 million more than should have, 2.2 million more went out than should have. You know, they're not paying Jeff Carr $1 million. I mean, it's like, maybe it's a $50,000 contract or something. I don't even know. It would be chump change compared. One catch like that would pay for it for 10 years or more.
Great, thank you.
So, yeah.
I have a slightly different take on why I asked the question about $1 million. For me, it's also faithfulness in the process and the integrity of what we're doing here, both on the legislative side. So whether you changed it from 500,000 to $1 million or not, the question is, do we get embarrassed in the press because of how we did not follow good, sound, arm's length transaction processes, independently of whether the trigger was 500,000 or $1 million? We're talking about confidence, if you will, in what the ACC does at all.
Yeah, I think there is this tension because they see their mission as, you know, pushing this out. And we saw it with the capital investment program where, you know, we were looking at all these awards. And had they done it the way they wanted to, there would have been about 10 recipients that each got close to $1 million. And that would have happened very fast. They already had them lined up. The model was an inconvenience to them that they argued strenuously against. It ended up going to maybe 80 or 85 different companies because the amounts were lower. So the state gets the benefit of all those projects out. Those 10 that said they wouldn't do it if they didn't get, went ahead anyway, even with smaller amounts. And there was money left for lots of other businesses that, you know, otherwise would have been zeroed out in the thing. So, you know, there are public benefits to that and benefits to public treasury. I do think there's a problem, though, with all this COVID spending that was so loose, so fast, so, you know, easy, that there's kind of an expectation that, oh, this is how we handle money like that. We're not going to have money like this. It's going to come out of taxpayers' pockets, and it needs to be spent as if it was our own money. You know, I mean, it's not this free money from Washington.
Corrupting of judgment.
What's that?
Corrupting of judgment.
It really has changed
Corrosive.
the mindsets. Yeah. Anyway.
Anything else you want to share with us here?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, if there are questions that arise, be happy to respond to stuff.
Yeah.
I'm back to, should the amount be less? Would that have saved, or will that likely save? That is the $1 million trigger. Would that have, is it more likely than not that that will save some compromised embarrassment of misdeeds to lower the threshold?
It could be $500,000, and there are not that many projects that are up like that. So it's not like you'd have a big increase in the cost to do it, or even the time, because it's good. Most of these will be a fairly quick review.
Yeah.
And, but something that was maybe a $4 or $5 or a $6 million thing, I would spend some time with that. I would want to look at, more information for that. But a lot of the other ones, just that they know it's being looked at, it's treated differently. So.
I heard this anecdote maybe in this committee recently, but about, for a long time in Vermont, you didn't have to put in a septic system if you had more than 10 acres.
You didn't have to get state
State approval of your septic system if you had more
I
than.
had to have one, but it
Yes,
could be
okay.
locally.
It could be whatever system you came up with. And so we have all these properties that are 10.01
Yeah,
acre.
0.9995.
Yes, so, I wonder if this will create an award scenario like this, but I guess that remains to be seen.
Well, the model though is doing a lot of the running on that, so I think it's harder to pick a number.
Game that.
It'd be one thing if you were asking for awards and then people would be coming in like that. There is one other thing that I think maybe is important. This issue of job retention or a company that's shutting down being included as a possible awardee does not appear to be consistent with statute. And Chair of House Commerce, upon granting this, told ACCD, and you can correct me, I wasn't there, but that they
On the
should not.
record. Put it on the record.
Put it
Yeah.
on the record saying he didn't expect to see any more of those. And I understand that Ledge Council didn't feel like he had to change statute because what they were doing was not consistent with statute in the first place, which gets back to the issue at one point in the original bill that you had put together. You were even saying that the legal counsel that ACCD uses should be reporting not to ACCD, but to the Attorney General, so that you're getting unbiased legal information about.
Attorney General
That's what
would say
they.
no, thank you. on that.
But yeah,
General's up.
of course, who would want this, it's like, yeah. But anyway, I think it's important to know. Otherwise, I would say, my feeling is if you want to do it, great, put it in statute, make it clear. Then we would have a variant of the model that's used for that kind of thing. But if it's not in statute, it shouldn't be. Anyway, the understanding, I hope, is that without statutory changes, that it's not going to happen again. So.
If there's any doubt in anybody's mind, I would be sure the statute says, by the way, this is not part of the veggie regime.
Yeah, so you're-
Period.
When in the process of drafting with David, there was a few times where he's like, no, that's already law. Nope, that's already law too. And I was like, but they do, what? Okay. And so there was sort of an interesting working through what does it take to sort of put belts and suspenders on the law, and then recognizing there's already belts and suspenders on the law, and what we might need is just sort of,
The argument from ACCD was, we've been doing this for years. And it's like, that's because nobody looked at it for years, and that doesn't make it right, or,
Providers is no providers.
yeah.
this study, are there pieces that you would want added to this study, Tom? Do you want to, sit on the study committee? Have you been able to look at the study language?
Well, it started out being very, very specific, and then it became very general. So it sounds like they can pretty much look at whatever they want to.
It does seem that way.
And so I imagine, we'd be involved and joint fiscal would be involved and all the rest. But, I do think there are things you can do that are big picture and then small picture. There are a lot of programmatic details one of the things with CIP that was useful is we asked everybody who applied, what would you do if you don't get the award? And it was amazing how, if they weren't coached by, a regional development corp person or something like that, they would usually say, well, we're going to do something, but it would be less or later or whatever. Great, then we model the difference. And so the award's much smaller, but then they still do it. And the state gets the same benefit, but with less money. That's all to the good. So just that question, is a useful part. That's an application process thing. And even to ask ahead of time, how much do you need? It might be lower than what the cost benefit model comes up with. And if it is, go for it. That's what they said they needed. State gets more out of it. That's all to the good. So little things like that, can make a difference. There could be like a taxpayer advocate that's, a part of the review process who's purposely looking at the financials from a skeptical perspective so that the questions get asked and then everybody can hear the answers. But the executives who are there, we're getting asked, oh, you got this much in the bank and you're saying you can't afford to do this even though the market's really great or something. And what gives? And maybe it's a good answer, maybe there isn't. But you'd have somebody asking that. I don't know the extent to which that happens or not,
None of us do because we're not.
because executive sessions where a lot of that transpires. But anyway, that's another angle. Oh, and lastly, one thing that did come up that I think is interesting is there was talk about, doing it more either as a loan or with an equity position, as some federal programs have been done. So some of the big bailouts have turned out to be very profitable for the federal government, the auto bailout and some others, because they had equity positions. And, if getting equity is the problem, yeah, the state could get involved, but then you'd have upside. And if you did, that could fund a lot of other stuff down the road. So that should be something I think that you look at with loans too. It could be low cost, focused on sectors that we really want to, supercharge, but then we get the money back and can use it. It could be self-funding. Anyway.
It's a really fun idea.
But
It's a very fun idea.
yeah.
Okay. Anyone else? Questions, thoughts? Okay. Thank you so much for joining us.
Got another vote.
We're gonna all go back to the floor, and continue debate.
Great.
And I'll see everyone back in the committee room tomorrow at 9.
So we're done for here.
We're done for here for the day. We'll be back in committee at 9 tomorrow. We're gonna try to do 4 or 5 bills before lunch. Lunch is gonna start at 12:30 tomorrow, not 12.
What's that?
Our schedule tomorrow includes lunch at 12:30 instead of 12. So if you had a date,